For a lot of us with complex trauma, the trauma itself isn't the hardest part. It's what comes after. The anxiety, the hypervigilance, the feeling that you can never fully relax. Your body learned to live in survival mode even when the danger was long gone, and now it keeps going back there all the time. And if this is happening to you, you're not crazy and you're definitely not weak. And you're not alone, because anxiety after trauma can feel even worse than the trauma itself. And those of us who've been there know exactly what this is like. And in this video, I'm going to break down exactly why this happens, what's going on in your nervous system, and what you can do to start getting relief. So why does anxiety linger after trauma? Most of us assume that once we get out of a traumatic situation, relief should follow. But for many of us, that's when the anxiety actually intensifies. The reason for this is in how trauma rewires the nervous system. When you spend long periods of time in survival mode, your body and mind adapt to that state, and they start to treat it as if it's the default. So even when the threat disappears, your nervous system doesn't get the memo. Instead, it keeps scanning for danger, convinced that real safety doesn't exist, or if it does, it definitely doesn't last. This is why hypervigilance becomes a habit for you. Your nervous system starts treating everything like it might be a threat. A sudden noise, a shift in someone's tone of voice, an unexpected text message. Each of these simple things can feel like an alarm going off that triggers the same fight or flight response that once kept you safe, that once had a purpose. And in time, this response becomes so automatic that it makes it impossible for you to truly relax. Another reason anxiety gets worse after trauma is because a state of calm now feels unsafe. If your nervous system spent years adapting to stress and chaos, stillness feels unnatural. It can even feel like a threat. If you've lived in a high-stress home or environment for long periods, you might still feel restless, on edge, or suspicious when things are too quiet, because your nervous system interprets calm as an unknown, and the unknown as something dangerous. Emotional tunnel vision also plays a role in this. Instead of feeling a full range of emotions, complex trauma can cause your nervous system to lock into a few dominant feelings like fear, anxiety, or numbness. And in a state when your nervous system is on high alert, even neutral experience can feel threatening because your mind is stuck in a loop of interpreting everything through the lens of past danger or of past threats. So how do we break free from these anxiety loops that we get stuck in? This is where what I call the power gap comes in. The space between trigger and reaction, the moment where you get to choose, where you get to use your own power to interrupt this trauma pattern. When you're caught in trauma-driven anxiety, that gap doesn't feel like it exists. Everything feels immediate and automatic, like there's no space between the feeling and the response. But there is a space there, and the more you notice that space, the bigger it gets, and the more you create opportunity to change your reactions. Because your automatic reactions are just a habit, and habits can most definitely be rewired. But it takes conscious effort on your part, especially in the beginning. So the first step to breaking anxiety loops is recognizing them for what they are, patterns, not reality. Your nervous system is responding to old programming and not necessarily what's happening right here in the present moment. So start noticing when your brain is repeating the same fearful thoughts or feeling the same physical symptoms of anxiety. Awareness alone creates some space. Next, try out different techniques to interrupt the cycle. When you feel anxiety rising in your body and in your emotions, engage your senses in some way. Cold exposure, deep breathing, movement, all of these can interrupt your automatic responses and send a signal to your nervous system that you are safe. And the more you reinforce safety in your body, the more your brain learns that not every trigger is an emergency it has to respond to. Rebuilding a sense of safety takes time, but it's really, really important. For many of us with complex trauma, this means intentionally spending time in places that are peaceful, that are predictable, and that are calm. Better yet, making sure your home where you spend the most amount of your free time feels this way. This is why so many of us who've been emotionally dysregulated for many years of our lives, we need our homes to be peaceful, and we prioritize our emotional peace above all other things. At first, it might feel uncomfortable trying to enjoy peace. You might feel restless, like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop all the time. But Over time, your nervous system will begin to adjust, and it will start to recognize that safety can stick around, that it's not something that's going to be taken away from you just as you get comfortable. Even though that's what you're used to, because that's what your emotional life felt like when you were little. That's where that feeling comes from. So using this power gap that I talk about is a really important part of rewiring anxiety. When you feel the rush of panic, pause. Instead of immediately reacting, take a breath and ask yourself, is this a real and immediate threat? Or is my nervous system running an old script? The more you practice delaying your response, whatever that response is, the more control you gain over your reactions. Expanding your emotional range is part of this practice. Trauma has a sneaky way of narrowing our emotional experiences so that fear, anger, anxiety, they become the dominant and often only feelings that we feel. But there are so many more emotions available to you: curiosity, contentment, hope. Even if what you're feeling is a negative emotion, there is a great range of negative emotions that are lower on the scale of severity than fear or terror or panic. And a lot of what happens in cycles of anxiety and panic is that we misinterpret emotions like discomfort, boredom, pensiveness, annoyance as more severe emotions. We go to the extreme end of that emotion we're feeling and we call it that. For example, we feel glum or pensive and we say it's depression, or we feel mild agitation or apprehension and we call it fear. Which is why the more you intentionally explore and name your emotions using a bigger vocabulary, the easier it gets to shift out of automatic anxiety loops. And I talk about expanding our emotional vocabulary throughout my videos because I know what an important part of healing this is. Once you start to name other emotions, what you're really doing is you're learning to de-escalate your emotional responses into emotions that are more neutral, more mild, and a lot of the time more manageable. This is something I personally struggled with a lot when I was at the height of my anxiety because my emotional vocabulary was so small and limiting. Anxiety after trauma isn't just in your head. It's a real physiological response that your nervous system learned to keep you safe. But now you don't need to live in survival mode anymore. You can retrain your system, step into this power gap to interrupt the automatic trigger response cycle, and start living in a conscious way instead of just reacting. If this sounds familiar to you, let me know in the comments. Have you felt like your anxiety got worse after trauma? Let me know what your experience was like. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe because we're going to keep breaking down these patterns and giving you real ways to heal. You always have more power than you think. Use it. I'll see you in the next video.